Welcome to the Financial Aid Series Part 3. Next steps, what to do once the FAFSA is complete. Once the FAFSA has been submitted by all contributors, the student will receive a notification. On the FAFSA submission summary, you'll see that there's 4 different tabs with information that the student can view, such as the information that was provided, school information of the schools that the student put on that should receive their FAFSA information, and any next steps that the student should take. The schools that were submitted will respond to the student. They'll receive financial aid offers from the schools, which consist of the cost of attendance, the different types and amounts of financial aid by program that they're eligible for, the net cost to attend, and any next steps to finalize the offer. These next steps might include accepting and/or declining the different types of financial aid that the student has been offered. Each school has their own designated way to be able to accept or decline the offer. There may be additional paperwork that's needed that needs to be returned to the financial aid office, such as verification documents or tax returns. So please take a look to see if the student needs to return any of those pieces of documentation, and do so as soon as possible. If the student is faced with any unusual circumstances, you may want to contact the financial aid office, especially if things that are reported on the FAFSA do not meet or reflect the current situation. If the student is planning on taking out a student federal loan, the student will have to complete a master promissory note and entrance loan counseling. Those can be completed at studentaid.gov. If the student is selected for verification, there will be some additional documentation that needs to be provided. Verification is a random process where the student is selected by the federal processor to confirm the data that's been reported on the FAFSA. Again, watch for information provided by the school to see if there is additional documentation that needs to be provided. Read through that carefully, contact the financial aid office if they have questions, and the information is provided back to the school, not to the federal processor. Special and unusual circumstances. So if the family or the student is facing a situation where the data on the FAFSA doesn't necessarily match the current situation, again, as mentioned, you would want to contact the financial aid office. Some of these situations may include if there's additional medical or dental expenses that are not covered by insurance, if a parent lost a job or lost income, if there's been a recent separation of household or divorce, if the student perhaps is facing homelessness or risk of being homeless, or if there is a situation where the student and the parent have become estranged from each other, or maybe there's a risk of harm if the student is faced with being in contact with the parent, or if there's just some other unusual circumstance where the student cannot reach the parent. These special circumstances do not include things like the cost of athletic camps or vacations or home remodeling, or the fact that maybe the family is just unwilling to pay for the cost of education. When you are faced with a special circumstance, again, it is best just to contact the Office of Financial Aid for each institution that you're looking at attending. Each institution has their own type of documentation that needs to be provided, and it is up to the discretion of the financial aid office at each institution as to how they're going to handle that situation. And these situations do need to be handled on an individual and yearly basis. We're often faced with the question of who is the parent on the FAFSA and how do we handle it if we've recently become divorced. So since it is using tax information from the prior year, the FAFSA is a snapshot of the current situation. So even though the tax documentation might not match up with what's currently happening, you are supposed to report what is the current situation. So there may need to be some changes that happen within the FAFSA, and that is, again, a situation, when you're completing the FAFSA, you complete it as is the situation today. So if you're, facing a separation or widowed or divorced today, that's what you're reporting on the FAFSA, even though the tax documentation might not match that, in which case you would work with the financial aid office to help fix that on the FAFSA. If it is a divorce situation, who the parent of record is supposed to be is the parent within the last 12 months that has provided the most support. Again, it also lists on here some information of, if there's a parent that is providing child support, then that child support that's being paid out by that parent counts towards that parent's amount, as you're trying to figure out who provides that most support. It doesn't matter who's claiming the child on their taxes. That doesn't help determine who's being reported as parent on the FAFSA. However, that is, once that parent is selected on the FAFSA, the number of dependents on that tax return is what's being used as the household size. Just some reminders and helpful hints. The FAFSA does need to be filed each year. Even though it's opening in December this year, in the future years, it is supposed to go back to being open in October. And again, it's always using the prior tax year. So again, if you're filing the form in 2024, it'll use 2022 taxes. There is the way for the student to monitor the completion status of all contributors. So studentaid.gov will help the student do that. And it's always a good idea, again, for students to be checking their email to see if there's anything else that needs to be provided. Thanks again for joining. Next in the series are just some parting words from us.